Oh, well, hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And today I get to cover a infamous cult horror psychological thriller that I have been eyeing up for many, many months, which is the 1989 thriller slash body horror that is Society. Um, it's interesting, I suppose, in the 1980s because this film, I suppose, is what fascinates me about the film is the fact that, of course, plot-wise, it is about... it's very Invasion of the Body Snatchers, it's very The Thing, it's very... it has the ethos of character identifies himself as different from the people around him. He thinks there is some kind of conspiracy going on, and he is unclear who he can or cannot trust. And so, therefore, what is going on and who is involved in it? And of course, there is some kind of horror or supernatural slant to it. But what I find fascinating, because it's very individualist versus the communal, where it has that sense of youthful rebellion to it. The idea of, he's a young guy, his sister seems to buy into this society, his parents are already deep within it, and the community seems to be deep within it, and yet he feels a sense of isolationism, that he is different in some way. And that's not a particularly unique narrative. And yet, I suppose what I find interesting in this sort of philosophical sense is the fact that if this had come out through previous decades, there would have definitely been a McCarthyist or post-McCarthyist slant to it. If you look at, say, Invasion of the Body Snatchers versus the 50s version, 50s, 60s version, against the 80s version, yes, the 80s version still has that Red Scare aspect to it, but it's more about assimilation and assimilation theory, whereas the original absolutely was a Red Scare film, a McCarthyist Red Scare film. I mean, The Thing is absolutely a communist thriller. The idea of, there's a group of us who are American and believe in sort of the American values, but there is that sense of, they're being assimilated by a whole. And so you would watch this with the sort of the ethos of, if this was made in the 50s, 60s, and even into the 70s, you would assume that. You would assume that the political philosophy slant is sort of, like I say, individualist versus communal ideas. It's not really that, though. It's much more, not quite the reverse of that, but it's very much a suburban versus, suburban idealist versus rebellious freedom. And of course it feeds more into that 70s and 80s ethos of, that's the era where all of a sudden young people's ideologies wildly differed from sort of the principles of old America, of nuclear suburban America. And that embodies that completely. The idea of this very rough-looking, punk kid who, him and his friends very much pushing against conformity. And, like I say, if this was made in the 50s, 60s, 70s, though you have, rebellion, youthful rebellion represented in those eras in cinema, of course, all the way back to Rebel Without a Cause, I think the 80s was the period in which that was best represented, where that idea felt the most in keeping with sort of the cultural revolution of that time. And this is a really this is one of those films that really earns its payoff. You know, you have, for 75% of this film, you have a psychological thriller / conspiracy thriller where you're not entirely sure where this is going. You have your lead. He and his friends allege some kind of event is going on in the community, and you of course have this sort of community, you know, this communal sense of weirdness. But as the audience are seeing it through the perception of your protagonist, you immediately are suspicious, and yet at the same time you look at it and go, well, this could be a film where it turns out nothing is going on, and that this is, like I say, a post-McCarthyist ideology where young guys who have sort of been influenced by the idea of conspiracy and of not trusting your neighbour have sort of become the next evolution of that, where they just don't trust anyone and don't just trust the sort of the social structures. And as I'm watching this, you get that sense of, is this going somewhere? What's the revelation going to be? Is it going to earn its revelation? And where's the horror? Because it advertises as a horror. People say Society is a horror film. And except for very strange focuses on things like insects, on just weird moments of tension that indicate something other than a psychological thriller, you get that sense of, is there going to be some kind of payoff that veers more towards the horror? And admittedly, it absolutely does. It absolutely... I mean, because what it results in and what it is so shocking and yet thematically sensible. I mean, the whole film has this psychosexual aspect to it. And of course, it's about the fact that the protagonist is going through puberty. He has a relationship with a girl who's much more conformist, and he has a relationship that then goes into a relationship with a girl who is not conformist, sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And you get that sense of, oh, this is a guy discovering his sexual identity, discovering his place, and yet feeling the push against the people who are trying to assimilate him into normality. And again, it feeds into that sense of, I am different from these people. You know, identity culture, where it's like, oh, I am different, therefore there must be, you know, perhaps I am adopted, basically. He keeps alleging perhaps he is adopted. And as I say, the psychosexual aspect of it, there is this real weirdness in the tension between him and his family members and him and his community, and the language that's being used infers something, well, again, this sort of sexual undertone to it. And yet, as I say, the question you ask is this all because the protagonist is a pubescent teenager who just sees things in this way? And then you get to the payoff. And now this is the point where I'm just going to say, if you're interested in horror, if you're interested in these pulpy, cult films, if you like The Thing, if you like the original Stepford Wives, absolutely you should see this. This is up there with that ilk of film. It is a little bit campy. It has a little bit too much, because it's trying to offset the weirdness with humour. It possibly goes a little bit too much into the sort of humour side of it, but this is definitely worth watching, and I am going to have to spoil it because I cannot discuss Society without talking about the ending. The ending is infamous in cult circles. I managed to avoid it while watching it, but looking into it, I'm like, wow, this is something people said. You must watch Society for the ending. So, if you haven't seen it, I absolutely recommend seeing it, and I'm going to spoil it in 3, 2, 1. The stuff where it gets to the point where he goes and finds out that they are a mass of human flesh, like all of the characters that we've met, the mother and the father and the sister, the psychiatrist, psychiatrist, the judge who we keep hearing about, the fact that all of these people merge into this undulating mass of flesh is truly Cronenberg. Truly, I genuinely, as I was watching this, thought, is this a Cronenberg film? Because this feels like a Cronenberg. Possibly a little bit too humorous, because Cronenberg does not find, when he presents body horror, he does not find it funny. And this tries to go into sort of make, isn't it? We're going to throw some jokes in here and there just to try and make you feel a little bit more comfortable. Because when you get to that payoff and you see the mass and the body and the idea that what they do is they take people and they feed on them, but they don't feed on them like cannibals or vampires or zombies or ghouls. They turn into this writhing sexual flesh mound, and then absorb in these unwilling victims, essentially like pulling them apart. It's so grotesque and shocking that it's like, yes, you've paid off. You've paid off this near hour plus time of build up of psychological thriller, of sense of like what is going on here, because it like I say, it hits all those notes, and you just it is hard to look at because it's so like, oof. If there's anything wrong with this film, it's the fact that once you have that imagery and once you pay off the stuff with the sister and the mother and the brother of the main character, and the fact that he does turn out to be adopted, and he does turn out to be being prepped to be a feast for this community, this society. And as I say, it hits all of these different grotesque pseudo-sexual kind of ideas. Where do you go from there? And this film, like I say, has weird things. Like, it does have weird comedy moments. The soundtrack as a whole is unlistenable because it's trying to be a little bit goofy. It's trying to sort of make you feel a little bit more comfortable, and yet also is a bit off-putting. It just doesn't quite work for me. And the ending, once you have that imagery, where do you go from there? And I don't think the film quite knew. I think the film really struggled to know, what do you end this film with other than this grotesque, like, cult slash alien in terms of like other non-human, like, flesh mound. And then once they had done that, there's nowhere to go. There's no way to sort of to resolve it. There's no way to up the ante. And so it's kind of stupid, the ending. There's this whole thing with the fist fight with the sort of main bully character. Yes, there is a really interesting image involving pulling him inside out. But frankly, it just doesn't know how to end. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that, where do you go from here? But man, the very ending is a little bit poor. And again, it sort of veers more into and it ends on a joke. And I understand why they went for that, because otherwise this would be practically unwatchable. Well, not unwatchable, but unwatchable for like a mainstream audience. But man, it is not a film that like... It's a film that really struggles with its identity and struggles to sort of hit a tone, because when it comes to the psychological thriller aspect, when it comes to the psychosexual aspect, when it comes to the conspiracy thriller aspect, it hits those perfectly, and the payoff is fantastic. And then there are just these other elements that just really bring it down. But honestly, this is I'm really glad I finally saw this, because I've been suggested this as a horror fan for a long time, and it's definitely up there as one which I'll be thinking about for a while. It's no Texas Chainsaw. It's no The Thing, but in terms of cult horror weirdness, yes, this is phenomenal. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit the like button, comment below and share the video, because it's all helping the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded, and check out my back catalogue of over 200 videos. Follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I tweet about TV shows and films, and I share these videos once they're uploaded to YouTube, either the day of or the day after. Thank you for joining me. Take care.